Chapter 3 The First Virginians. When the English parents told stories to their children, they often spoke of monsters, trolls, wild beasts, and witches. Those were savage stories, strange and disturbing. Since everyone knew there was a savage side to life, the stories had a kind of realness to them, even when they were make believe. But those weren't the only stories they told. There were tales of splendor and goodness, too. Every child heard the Bible's first story, which was of a Garden of Eden. Eden was a place of great beauty, a paradise. Many of the goodness stories were about sweet, simple people who lived in harmony with nature. And these stories seemed real, too, because there was much goodness in the world. Did you know that the stories you read in childhood stay with you all your life? They influence adults more than most of them realize. So when English men and women learned of a land of great beauty where people lived close to nature, many of the English thought of that land as paradise. They called the natives savages, but meant the word kindly. And the first English visitors to the New World described the Indians as courteous and gentle and great. But later, when others met those great savages, they found they didn't always act as people do in storybooks. Soon some were calling them worse names than savages. They called them beasts. Some said they were servants to the devil. Others said they were part animal and part human. But those people, the Indians, were just real people, like the English. They lived in families and towns governed by leaders. They farmed, hunted, played games, and fashioned beautiful objects. Let's take a break and read our side things. Here's a picture of great leader of some Native Americans that the English are going to encounter. And you'll see this picture in other ways too. The Powhatan had about 900 subjects. The subject is people underneath him, people who he rules. His land stretched from what is now Washington, D.C. to northern North Carolina. Mr. Bob used to live in North Carolina. And then this sidebar here says earthly paradise. We have discovered the goodliest soil under the cope of heaven, so abounding with sweet trees that bring such sundry rich and pleasant gums, grapes of such greatness as France, Spain, or Italy have no greater. The continent is of huge and unknown greatness, and very well peopled and towned, though savagely, and the climate so wholesome we had not one sick since we landed here. It was letters like this one, written by Ralph Lane in 1585, that made people want to go to the New World. Lane was a member of Raleigh's Roanoke colony. That's a colony that disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to it. Okay, so just wait. Here's where we were. I was talking about how the Native Americans had lived in families in towns governed by leaders. They farmed, hunted, played games, and fashioned beautiful objects. Some of them were wise and some were foolish. Some were kind and some were mean. But most were a bit of all those things. One of the most interesting Indians the English would meet was the Powhatan, or the ruler or emperor of eastern Virginia. His real name was Wahunsonacock, and he had inherited an empire of 5 tribes. Through daring, strength, and leadership, Powhatan soon held sway over dozens of villages and thousands of Indians. The English would call the Indians of his empire Powhatan Indians. They were woodland Indians who spoke Algonquin dialects and hunted, fished, and farmed in a region of great abundance. The area surrounded the Chesapeake Bay and went west to the mountain foothills and south to what would someday be North Carolina's border. It was a land of rivers, bays, and estuaries, of ducks, geese, wild turkeys, and deer, of fertile soil, fish, and shellfish, of wild berries, nuts, and grapes. That's a lot of resources. And then here's estuary. It's going to be one of your vocabulary words. It's a body of water where the mouth of the river meets the sea. And we're going to learn about the Bear Grease a little bit further on, but let's read about it right here. The bear grease that the Indians rubbed on their bodies made their brown skin shine with a reddish glow. Europeans thought it was really red, and that was the name, redskin. That was how the name quote, redskin, which many Europeans once used for Native Americans, came to be. It's based on a misperception, which is an error in the way things are seen. Also, just so you know, that is considered a pretty racist term. So, yeah, you don't want to use that term. So I'm going back right here. Oh, maybe it won't highlight. Yeah, I'm going to go right here. Powhatan's people raised vegetables, corns, beans, squash, and pumpkins, which was more than half the food they ate. Because they farmed, they lived in settled villages. Corn was their most important food. They ground it and made it into flat pancakes that served as bread or rice does in any other cultures. Aside from corn, the food they ate changed with the seasons. Fresh vegetables in the summer and fall, game in the winter, and fish, stored nuts, and berries in the spring. Spring was when the corn supplies ran low, and sometimes they went hungry. There was much small game in the region: raccoon, opossum, squirrel, turkey, and rabbit. But it was deer these Indians relied on most for food and clothing. Unfortunately, like people elsewhere, they overhunted. Deer became scarce. And they knew if they roamed outside the Powhatan's territory, looking for better hunting grounds, they risked war with other tribes. It was the men who hunted and fished and fought. Women farmed. Men and women had set roles in this society and rarely changed them. Children helped their parents, played, and didn't go to work until they were young adults. The boys often played in scarecrow houses that stood in the middle of the fields. From there, they threw stones at rabbits or other animals that might nibble on the crops. It trained their throwing arms, and that helped when they became hunters. Little girls played with clay, made pots, and helped their mothers plant and cook. Boys and girls played running games. There were no horses. They hadn't arrived in this part of the New World yet, so fast runners were prized. Sometimes they would dress up like their parents, painting their bodies and wearing necklaces and bracelets of shells and beads and animal bones. Over here, remember, horses came to America with the Spanish conquistadors. Even 100 years later, they were still a rarity. So here's an interesting map. You might be able to see it better in the book or blow it up on the PDF. The men and women tattooed beautiful designs all over their bodies. Men sometimes hung animal claws, birds' wings, bats, even live green snakes around their neck. They rubbed themselves with bear grease. It repelled mosquitoes, kept them warm, and made their skin glisten in the sunshine. Most of the year, these Indians needed little clothing, although in winter they wore deerskin garments and sometimes cloaks of feathers or fur. And it says about this map, and Captain John Smith would never have been able to make this map of Virginia without the help from local Algonquin Indians, the Powhatans. You'll hear more about John Smith in Chapter 5. And so here's another picture of the Powhatan right here. And I think this is the Powhatan's brother. I can't read that right there, but we'll learn more about it. Some of you may recall, I think this is the brother that did the Indian raid on the massacre on Jamestown. I don't recall if this book covers that. Anyway, back to the rest of the chapter. So right here it says, "Werewolwants" is a Delaware Indian word that means literally "he is rich." The great Powhatan had a beautiful deerskin sewed with designs and lustrous pearls. Powhatan had stacks of deerskins and storehouses of corn, and he had copper and pearls. The tribes brought all this and more to him. It was a tribute given to a ruler. Each tribe had its own leader, called a werewolwants. Werewolwants. And also priests and healers and others with power. But Powhatan was special. All those who met him noted it. He knew how to command, when to be stern and unforgiving, and when to be understanding. The story was told of a time he visited the Powhatamucks, who were under his rule. The young let me just start this again. Potowmucks. I probably would not pronounce it that way. I probably would have said Potomac. But anyway, Potowmucks, who were under his rule. The young Potowmucks The young Potomac warriors came before him. Each told of awesome deeds of valor against fierce enemies or wild beasts of the forest. Finally, one young man stood before Powhatan and said, I, my lord, went out this morning into the woods and valiantly killed 6 muskrats. While that may be no more than boys do, it is true, while much you have heard is fable. When Powhatan heard that, he broke into laughter and gave a reward to the truth teller. Powhatan's priests had foretold that his mighty empire would one day be destroyed by men from the east. The Chesapeakes, who lived by the ocean, were the easternmost of his tribes. Perhaps that was why, just before the 16th century turned into the 17th century, in the European method of reckoning, Powhatan fought the mighty Chesapeake Indians and left them weak and powerless. Powhatan didn't yet know that 3 small ships were headed for his realm. They were coming across the ocean from an island far across the east. A little bit more about Powhatan was said to have 100 wives. 1/3 of his 9,000 subjects were warriors. Powhatan gave his decorated deerskin to Captain Christopher Newport. It's now in a museum in Oxford, England. We'll take a look at it. It's pretty amazing. The Chesapeakes lived on land that is now included in the cities of Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Portsmouth, and Chesapeake. And here's a picture. It says Virginian Indians cooking a stew of corn, fish, and beans. This picture was drawn at the end of the 16th century by John White. That's the end of chapter 3.